their maximums to keep up with the demand. There's not enough extra capacity in the system right now to make up for big disruptions, such as those caused by storms or geopolitical events. In addition, most of the world's new oil and gas will come from countries with very different economic situations, political beliefs, and agendas that may be different from the United States. So the available supplies of potential imports may not be as large as we would like. And to buy these imported sources, we will have to compete for them price-wise in the world marketplace. There is a persistent belief that big oil can increase supplies at any time. But most of the world's oil is controlled by exporting nations, not the publicly owned companies like ConocoPhillips. The 6 biggest international publicly owned oil companies have direct access to only about 5% of the world's reserves. Another 30% is available, in theory, through partnerships with national oil companies. But there is a great deal of international competition for opportunities to develop this roughly 1/3 of the world's oil and gas. This competition did not exist just 30 years ago, and it comes largely from the national oil companies. This leaves 2/3 of the world's resources completely off limits to companies like ourselves. There's another problem, one you may not want to hear about during a time of high energy prices. The problem is that the cost of developing and producing oil and gas is going up. Labor, equipment, and materials all cost more, and the energy prospects themselves are more challenging. In North America and Europe, we are generally only allowed to drill in some old areas which are now highly mature. So in these areas, we are chasing the tougher prospects, which are more remote, deeper waters, at deeper drilling depths with rougher weather and heavier, harder to produce oil. Although these resources are sometimes very large, they are more expensive to develop. We are also facing increased regulation and more stringent environmental standards. While many of these are certainly necessary and worthwhile, they do add to the cost environment. Meanwhile, U.S. policies have actually undermined energy security by restricting access to new areas, while doing nothing meaningful to promote energy conservation. As a result, the U.S. now imports 60% of our oil, and natural imports are also growing. All these factors together mean that the days of cheap energy are over. This does not mean, though, that we can't have reliable and affordable energy. I absolutely believe that this is still possible. But I repeat, it will take strong political and business leadership with a clear vision of the realities of the energy market and with a commitment to act for the greater good. Like me, you have probably followed the congressional energy debate during the past several months. And I have several concerns about its tone and its content. First, it punishes the energy industry instead of solving the problems. I'll give you some examples. One proposal would cap gasoline prices during emergencies, but in the past, we have seen that temporarily higher prices help attract supplies from elsewhere and reduce demand. This restores supply and demand balance, and then prices tend to then go back down. Passage of this proposal would create shortages and long lines during times of supply disruption, such as those that can be caused by hurricanes and other weather incidents. Tax proposals are another problem. Some would raise taxes on domestic production. Others would discriminate by targeting only the largest oil and gas companies. These proposals would cut into the funds needed for investment for the very companies that can lead the way on energy development. Another proposal would allow lawsuits against producing nations. This appeal to nationalism is opposite of what we should be doing, which is working together to encourage worldwide production. We should not antagonize or threaten these countries. My second key concern is that the proposed legislation focuses on today and the far distant future, but ignores the decades in between. It assumes to know the long-term answers today. It also assumes that we can quickly and painlessly switch over to alternative sources, even though they are not available now and may not be the right long-term solutions. There's no recognition that fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, and coal, keep our economy moving. They power our cars, heat our homes, generate electricity, and run our factories. This will still be true many years from now. Our total demand is simply too high. The job of building a new energy infrastructure is too big. We cannot change course that fast. It will not happen despite any well-intended legislation. In reality, we need oil and gas to bridge the gap and carry us through the transition to new energy sources. And again, this will take decades. So Congress needs to start thinking about that and to consider where the oil and gas that we need will come from. Unfortunately, some of the proposed legislation would make the current situation worse, such as further restricting drilling access. And there is too much that it would not do, such as it would not clear the permitting roadblocks we face in trying to build infrastructure, or do enough to reduce demand growth. To address these shortcomings, I'm offering some specific suggestions. The fundamentals of a sound U.S. energy policy must incorporate 4 major tenets. These are, first, diversifying our energy sources. Second, lowering their carbon intensity. Third, improving our energy efficiency. And fourth, encouraging investment in new technology. I'll go through each in a little more detail. Step 1 is diversifying our sources in all areas. This step really has about 3 parts. First is encouraging development of both conventional and unconventional fossil fuels. These have a great deal of remaining potential both here as well as overseas. Some can be recovered through traditional methods, and some will require new technology. Second, we must focus on our biofuels efforts on sources that are efficient and sustainable over the long term and that do not threaten food supplies. And third, we should encourage development of alternative and unconventional sources. I'll explain each suggestion in detail, starting with conventional oil and natural gas. Although the U.S. has only 3% of the world's remaining proved reserves, this is due in part to policy actions. We could add to our reserves by drilling in new areas that are currently off limits. Altogether, these areas are estimated to hold 80 billion barrels of recoverable oil and natural gas equivalent. How much is that? Well, it would exceed all of our current proved and oil gas reserves. The critics always claim that since one area or another offers only a few months or years of supply, it should not be developed. My response is, why transfer $4.4 trillion in potential national wealth, the market value of these resources, to other countries through imports? We could instead keep that money at home and gainfully employ thousands of Americans. All the industry needs is access. Otherwise, we must accept U.S. oil import dependence at the current rate of 60% or even higher in the future. We should end the federal drilling moratoria, and yes, we should meet strict environmental performance standards. Industry, technology, and operating practices have made quantum leaps in years since the moratoria were enacted. Our national vulnerability no longer allows us the luxury of ignoring so much energy potential. Unfortunately, instead of opening access, even today, some members of Congress are trying to limit it even further. Also, the process to obtain permits to build critical infrastructure is broken. We need more LNG terminals, electric transmission lines, and refinery expansions, but there are endless roadblocks to building them. Where infrastructure is clearly needed to serve national interests, preeminence is needed over local or special interests.